In a time of profound social and cultural change, an entire generation of young Americans stood united in their desire for more powerful cars, fueling the greatest horsepower war in automotive history. Screeching rubber through turns, roaring down back streets and country lanes, were fun-loving drivers in their wild and powerful dream machines. Just about anyone could afford to fly down the road in a boldly styled, attention-grabbing American icon, the muscle car. Hello, I'm Chip Foose, coming to you from the Marconi Automotive Museum in Tustin, California. A 1964 Pontiac sales brochure stated, quote, "The Pontiac GTO, a device for shrinking time and distance." To be perfectly honest, the GTO is not everyone's cup of tea. Designed as a piece of performance machinery, its purpose is to permit you to make the most of your driving skill, unquote. Based on a new mid-size A-body platform, the 1964 Pontiac GTO became a sales sensation. However, GM wouldn't be entirely sold on the Pontiac's success until the popularity of the muscle car could be measured with sales in other divisions.
When the GTO came out in 1964 as an option to the Le Mans, the Tempest, it just kind of set the rest of the divisions in General Motors and Mopar, the Chrysler field, and Ford, it caught them all by surprise. Nobody expected, I don't even think John DeLorean expected the GTO to be such a sensation in its freshman year.
The GTO was the first car that packaged not only the performance, but the image of a cool car as part of the deal. The emblems, the special wheels and tires, the bucket seats, the floor shift. It was all a package. The GTO changed the perception of high-performance cars was all about.
An act of pure marketing genius propelled the '64 GTO onto the world stage. A National Automotive magazine ran a comparison test that showed that the Pontiac GTO could perform on par with the most exotic super sports car of the era. The GTO had been specially prepared with Royal Bobcat upgrades to the stock suspension and 389 cubic inch V8 engine in Royal Pontiac's race shop. Although enhanced with significant performance capabilities, it was presented to the press in the same dressed-up manner that you could find on the floor of any Pontiac dealer. Restoration of this historic Royal Bobcat GTO was supervised by one of the men who had overseen the preparation of the car for its '64 magazine test, Jim Wangers.
Well, we put this deal together with Car and Driver to test the Pontiac GTO against the Ferrari GTO. We had Royal Bobcat packages in them, which were, you know, there was no EPA, they weren't illegal, they weren't breaking any emissions rules, they weren't hard to do, they didn't require any special work, just required good fuel. As a result, you know, Pontiac got some magnificent press from then on.
In '65, Pontiac knew they had a hit on their hands and kicked the advertising into high gear. Now they were prepared to feed the demand for America's hottest car.
And the car went from 32,000 to almost 66,000 in '65, and it was still offered as an option on the Le Mans.
The '65 GTO is considered one of the most distinctively styled muscle cars of the era and continues to impress.
One of my favorites is, of course, everybody's favorite, is the '65 GTO. The lines, all front to rear, they had a subtle bump in them for the wheel wells that meant you had bigger wheels on the car. Nice, beautiful little design in the hood scoop. The vertical headlights worked on that car. The split grille, of course, which was Pontiac thing at the time, was part of the Pontiac logo. And that car just worked. Everything about that car worked. That was probably one of the most beautiful of all the muscle cars in the whole series.
This '65 4-speed post coupe has the 389 tri-power V8 and features the Royal Bobcat performance upgrades, which boosted output to 375 horsepower.
Turned out that these were cars that were bought by people who just, wanted to drive fast. And when you saw one of those out on the street, you didn't have something pretty good, you knew to stay away from it.
The overall length of the 65 GTOs grew by 3.1 inches without altering the wheelbase and interior dimensions. The dashboard design was upgraded with an optional rally gauge cluster, and this example has period-correct gauges. Coming up, Dr. Olds makes its mark.
They had the best handling of all the muscle cars of that era. All of them.
The 1964 Pontiac GTO caught most of the automotive world flat-footed. Nowhere was the initial success of the GTO more resented than within GM itself. GM's luxury brand Cadillac stayed out of the muscle car race completely, and upscale Buick would take their time to build a serious contender. However, GM's largest division, Chevrolet, and the talented engineers at Oldsmobile were left scrambling, trying to match Pontiac's bold play with models of their own.
But you can't find a car to compare today with the Chevrolet.
Every division was pretty much its own little fiefdom. They didn't really share a whole lot. There was no love lost between the various divisions. They didn't share secrets. They didn't share technologies or parts. You were a Poncho fan for Pontiacs. You were a Chevy fan. You didn't even acknowledge the other guys. They were the bad guys.
But the sales potential of the performance-enhanced A-body platform was undeniable. The writing was on the wall, and to stay relevant, other divisions of GM would have to match or even exceed the GTO.
For 64, go old, where the action is.
In 1964, Oldsmobile was a staid, stuffy vehicle. Big vehicles, about the size of your house. But in 64, Oldsmobile came out with a vehicle called the 442. The 442 was intended not so much as a pure supercar or muscle car as we know it. It was more a gentleman's express.
The 442, much like the GTO, wasn't its own model, but rather an option package for the Cutlass or F85.
Oldsmobile's roomier, sportier. F85 Cutlass for 64. Go old.
Derived from the Cutlass, the 442 was innovative in many ways, not least of which thanks to its deliberately uncatchy name, which in 1964 represented the 4-barrel carb, 4-speed M24 gearbox, and dual exhaust.
The 442 was more of like a parts bin car. It didn't come off the line as the 442 to begin with. You had to order the B09 police apprehender package. It's an A-body car. It's a suspension that has 4 coil springs, no leaf springs in the rear. It's got front and rear sway bar and the box rear control arms for handling. 64 was a complete body changeover from 63. I enjoy the fact that it's got dual headlights and it's got a real aggressive looking grille. The tail panel's got a nice big piece of chrome in between the tail lights. This car just has a lot of character to it.
The 1964 442 didn't have quite the same level of performance as its rival from Pontiac. But with heavy-duty valve gear, posi-track, and a hot cam, it could more than hold its own on the street with its 330 cubic inch, 310 horsepower V8.
My dad was the original owner. He ordered the car 3 days before I was born, actually. Sold it in '96 and tracked it back down in '99. And wasn't long after that that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I've changed a couple things to make it look like he had it looking when I was a little kid. The car's been kind of a tribute to him ever since, and I've tried to keep it in that 1960s flavor. This car is a Wedgwood Mist metallic with a light blue interior. That's the factory ordered color that my dad requested when he bought the car.
By 1966, the 442 had come into its own as one of the industry's most desirable muscle cars. Now sporting a substantially more powerful motor, the 442 name was redefined as 400 cubic inches, 4-barrel carb, and dual exhaust. This target red 4-speed convertible does not have the base carburetor. It was ordered from Olds with the optional L69 package, featuring 3 2-barrel carburetors producing 360 horsepower. Sales of the 442 never quite reached the heights of offerings from other GM divisions, though it certainly wasn't because of quality or performance.
It was a price factor mostly. The kids really couldn't afford them. They always called those the doctor's cars or doctor's hot rods. They were considerably more money, and they were great cars. They were fast.
When Oldsmobile went to the 400 cubic inch engine, it became a real muscle car that was competitive with its brethren in the GM stables and also from other manufacturers. But you have to give Oldsmobile credit for one thing. They had the best handling of all the muscle cars of that era. All of them.
Still ahead, the bad boys wearing bow ties.
The Chevelles have evolved from basically super sport packages that were trim packages to super sport packages that were absolute performance packages.
With Pontiac and Oldsmobile committed to building muscle cars, Chevrolet could hardly stand by and lose market share to their rivals. Long considered the entry-level division, Chevrolet was General Motors' sales leader by a wide margin. Chevy was also no stranger to performance. Having been building the Corvette, the great American sports car, for more than a decade, they were perfectly suited to creating a car capable of blowing the doors off its competition. Chevrolet's Chevelle would soon become one of the most iconic muscle cars of the era. All eyes were on Detroit for the 1965 model year. Pontiac and Oldsmobile had already made their mark, and now it was Chevrolet's turn to put real performance into their A-body platform.
There's the brand new Chevrolet Chevelle.
Chevrolet would prime the pump of the emerging muscle car market with a limited run of big block cars that are today some of the most sought-after muscle cars in the world. The Chevelle Z16 Malibu SS.
Chevrolet was about a year behind on that program. In '65, the Z16 was nothing but go out there and just kill GTOs. That was their plan. It worked. Those were a real limited production cars, so the average kid knew about them, but you couldn't get one.
The Z16 had instant legitimacy with performance fanatics, thanks to a 396 cubic inch engine originally built for the Chevelle's legendary stablemate.
That was the first big block in '65. It primarily was built for the Corvette. That was the first year they put a big block in the Corvette. They detuned that engine and put it in the '65 Chevelle. It was 375 horse in the Chevelle, which they did that by dropping down to a hydraulic cam, and Chevrolet didn't want their Chevelles and stuff like that outrunning the Corvette.
Chevy engineers didn't just drop the big block engine into the car. They also added an upgraded suspension with front and rear roll bars, along with a larger rear axle. All 201 Z16s came with a Muncie 4-speed, upgraded dashboard components, and 5-spoke mag wheel covers at a price of $4,500. Considerably more than a '65 GTO, Chevy's Z16 succeeded in elevating the brand's credibility, with more affluent customers loyal to other GM divisions.
Well, the Chevelle is incredibly popular from Chevrolet. You know, General Motors hit a big home run with that car. It was the right size, and as it evolved, they created some great engine packages for that. There's the same profile. Could be the minimalist 6-cylinder basic transportation car, and that same envelope basically could house 375 factory-rated, solid cammed horsepower that which could just dominate in those particular classes.
Chevelles kind of evolved from super sport packages that were trim packages to super sport packages that were absolute performance packages.
In 1966, the Chevelle got an upgrade in both performance and styling, as it became clear that the car was going to be a big seller.
It was not the bottom of the line in Chevrolet, but it was not a luxury car, which allowed them to do some things in terms of option packages that made it much more appealing to the younger set. And those were the ones that carried the banner for the Chevelle for a long time.
The 1966 SS 396 stands proudly as one of the most popular and heralded muscle cars of the 1960s. The 396 cubic inch V8 engine can be ordered in 3 flavors, ranging from 325 to 375 horsepower. This 1966 4-speed Madeira Maroon Super Sport features bucket seats, knee knocker tack, and factory air conditioning. The hood scoops were non-functional, and a pair of dual headlights were widely placed over a blacked-out grille. Chrome bumpers and trim pieces were set around the wheel wells and rocker panels.
Those A-bodies, the mid-60 A-bodies, were just superb. Trim proportions, graceful lines. It's said that the mark of a good auto designer is knowing when to lift the pen.
The car bulged in the right places. It had the wheel wells that fit the wheels just right. And of course, they had the engines that went with them. So that car, probably more than anything, is the car that everybody recognizes as the supercar during the era.
It was a wonderful mix of good looks and great performance. Chevrolet had an incredible example with the Chevelle SS, especially with a big block engine. You put a 396 engine in that thing, and it'll scare the hell out of you and everybody else around you.
Coming up, a car with power and luxury.
So I think people tended to overlook the Buick. It shocked some when the performance level turned out to be as good as it was.
By the mid-60s, GM's Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile divisions were ready and willing to compete for a growing segment of young buyers, seduced by more powerful mid-size cars. Buick was not about to sit on the sidelines forever. They had produced Grand Sport options Skylarks and Rivieras for 2 years, but until 1967, had mostly relied on their decades-long reputation for comfort and styling to sell cars.
Oh, wouldn't you really rather have a Buick? A Buick? A Buick? Oh, wouldn't you really rather have a Buick this year?
The tried-and-true nailhead V8 had powered various Buick models, including the rakish Riviera, which was a full-size personal coupe that appealed to an upscale crowd who preferred modern curb appeal rather than raw performance.
Riviera by Buick, a great and rare machine that a woman can admire and enjoy to the fullest, but only a man can really understand.
Buick was late to the game because they were running a motor style that dated back to the 50s that was a good performer in its own way, but couldn't hold a candle to the cars that were being built by the other manufacturers.
But that all changed in 1967 when the Grand Sport became its own mid-size model. It turned heads with 2 newly designed engines, the GS 340 and the faster and more powerful GS 400. A futuristic-looking air cleaner sat on top of the new high-revving GS 400 engine, rated at 340 horsepower, with help from a dome combustion chamber, improved manifold, valves, and exhaust headers. The GS 400 joined the General Motors ranks as a full-fledged muscle car.
So I think people tended to overlook the Buick. It shocked some when the performance level turned out to be as good as it was.
This GS 400 4-speed hardtop features a black interior with bucket seats and tack mounted on the console. Styling features include a pair of faux hood scoops and a wide grille with horizontal and vertical bars separating dual headlights. The open wheel housings surround 14-inch wheels, and the rear is highlighted by handsome taillights.
Those were a lot of interesting cars, much more luxurious. Perhaps they didn't spend as much money on the marketing side of that to kind of drive that business. You bought a Grand Sport because there was a lot of brand loyalty, which transcended from one generation to another.
They were right there with Oldsmobile. Here again was a step up on the price chart, so the kids didn't jump into them quite as fast, and that was the real driving market for these cars. They're out there, but they aren't near as prevalent as they are in the Pontiac or the Chevrolet or even the Oldsmobile.
General Motors' mid-size rear-wheel drive A-body platform, first introduced in 1964, would allow Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Chevy, and eventually Buick to create an amazing variety of purpose-built performance vehicles. This classic A-body formula would ensure the lasting legacy of 60s supercars from Detroit. From the Marconi Automotive Museum in Tustin, California, I'm Chip Foose. We'll see you next time on American Icon. In a time of profound social and cultural change, an entire generation of young Americans stood united in their desire for more powerful cars, fueling the greatest horsepower war in automotive history. Screeching rubber through turns, roaring down back streets and country lanes, were fun-loving drivers in their wild and powerful dream machines.